They built now, 50,000 kilometers of high-speed rail,
more than the
which
rest
is
of the
more
world
than the rest of the
combined.
world combined. Yeah, it's about 2/3 of the world's high-speed rail.
欢迎来到胤蓝智库，一个在40年前有将近90%人口处于极端贫困的国家，是如何在短短数十年间建成占全球2/3、长达5万公里的高速铁路网，并将数十亿人口托举出贫困线。这究竟是自由市场机制的胜利，还是国家强力的规划典范？长期以来，西方发展经济学倾向于将西方制度视为现代化的唯一门槛，然而现实的发展轨迹却不断地冲击这种单一的叙事。当我们审视中国时，我们面对的是一个体量庞大、增速空前的庞然大物。在这个充满争议的节点上，今天的访谈为我们提供了一个极为难得的学术观察视角。我们邀请到剑桥大学发展经济学助理教授尤斯汀豪格。在这段深度的对话中，尤斯汀从长期研究全球制造业的学者视角，抛出了几个极具穿透力的观点。他指出，中国的发展彻底解构了传统 GDP 的指标单一解释力。从人均 GDP 的数值来看，中国似乎仍带有发展中国家的特征，但在实际的物质基础设施、产业链完整度及技术前沿布局上，中国已展现出世界一流水平。同时，他也客观剖析了中国劳动力市场中伴随着快速工业化而产生的结构性张力，从实际工资的显著增长到不可忽视的零工经济压力。传统发展理论为何在面对中国时屡屡失败？在高度复杂的国家治理与市场机制交织中，我们该如何正确理解中国崛起的几层逻辑？接下来，让我们跟随这场冷静而严密的深度对话，拨开意识形态的迷雾，请看正片。
So in absolute numbers, somewhere between 800 million and 1 billion people were lifted out of extreme poverty over roughly 4 decades in China. That's the largest and fastest such reduction in human history by a significant margin. So, does that fact vindicate the Communist Party of China? And if so, what policies and positions does it vindicate? In the 1980s, Deng Xiaoping liberalized the Chinese economy, allowing freer trade and profit-making by entrepreneurs. And that means that neoliberals will argue China's rise proves free markets work. But the Chinese state also kept a great degree of control in government hands, and the state remained thoroughly Leninist. So is its rise a vindication of the left? Or perhaps you might be watching this thinking I've got this all the wrong way round. Perhaps China's rise should not be a vindication of any ideology, because China's rise was built on the backs of suppressed labor and authoritarian politics. In that case, should China be precisely an example of how not to run a country? Now, I find these questions personally fascinating. I spend a lot of time thinking about them. And given China looks set to dominate the 21st century, they aren't questions anyone can afford to ignore. And I had the perfect guest to talk them over. Jostein Hauge is assistant professor in development economics at Cambridge University. He's written extensively about China and can often be found arguing with China hawks on Twitter. Like me, Jostein has just come back from a trip to China. So we also discussed some of our experiences there. Jostein Hauge, welcome to Novara Media.
Great to be here.
Great style, by the way. Can't go wrong. Black t-shirt, shaved head, stubble.
Yeah, doing my best Michael Walker impression.
Representation is important. You are assistant professor in development at Cambridge University. We're going to talk about China in this discussion. I think originally you were specialized in global manufacturing. I suppose tell us a bit about yourself. Sort of, what's your intellectual background? How did you come to focus so much of your attention on China?
So I started studying economics in Norway, where I grew up, where I'm from. Was a bit disillusioned by that education, felt I wasn't learning that much about the real world, wanted kind of a more heterodox approach to economics. And I also got interested in development economics. So I went to SOAS at London to do my master's there. And that place kind of shaped my intellectual inclination. And I did a master's degree in development economics at SOAS in London. For those who are unfamiliar with SOAS, that's a School of Oriental and African Studies. And then eventually I pursued a PhD in development studies at Cambridge, focusing on development economics, international political economy. And my interests have kind of developed into globalization, the role of the state in economic development, hence a focus on industrial policy.
And that was with Ha-Joon Chang, wasn't it? Who some of our audience will have heard of. So he wrote Kicking Away the Ladder.
That's correct. So Ha-Joon was actually my PhD supervisor. So obviously he's been a big influence on me. And yeah, given the things that things that I focused on, China eventually became very much the center of everything. So it wasn't that deliberate. It was just China sucked me in.
Is that just because of the scale? Because obviously if what you care about is poverty reduction and economic development, China is a country of 1.4 billion people, which, I mean, for 2 decades was growing at 10% per year. So is it just that sort of, if you're interested in development and you sort of look from a super macro perspective, the most development is going on there? Is it the scale, or is it something qualitative about China that sort of fascinated you?
Yes and no. Obviously, the scale meant that China just became such a huge topic in international political economy, in the world economy. But there were other things, such as my interest in the role of manufacturing in growth. China specifically, became this country, this huge economy that aimed to become a manufacturing powerhouse. And China also did some really interesting things in terms of the state sort of governing the market, which was an interest I had beyond China, and also clean energy technology, etc. So, the scale that you kind of have to know a bit about China if you do global economics and development economics, but also my specific sort of topical interests were very China-centric. And sort of over the last few years, I focused more on China because of that.
And China, I suppose, in a way, has it completely upended development economics? Because I suppose lots of development economics, I'm not an expert in it, but sort of I read books about it, and I did some economics in my degree. Lots of it is sort of these linear regressions where you sort of say, if you have freer markets, more democracy, you tend to have more development, and they'd end up getting all of these rules, which sort of said, basically, you should be more liberal. If you read sort of Why Nations Fail by Acemoglu and Robinson, that's kind of their argument. But then you've got this huge anomaly, which is kind of so big that it almost makes the rest of the endeavor look a little bit ridiculous. I mean, is there something to that?
Yeah, for sure. On the one hand, I think there's something to there in the sense that you're thinking of that they defy a lot of these ideas in mainstream development economics that sort of good institutions lead, or Western liberal institutions lead to development. China is clearly not the case. They have a very different governance structure. I think a lot of other countries actually defy that. So South Korea, Singapore, etc. We can talk about a lot of other examples of development. I also think it's worth talking about China as a disruptor in terms of the transformation we're seeing now. The scale and the pace is completely unique in human history, I would say. We've never seen a country this big grow this fast and disrupt the world economy this much. So in that sense, it's just disrupting things we're seeing in terms of economic development. I also think, as a person, as a sort of development economist at core, I was taught to think of development through many indicators, but the main indicator being kind of GDP and GDP per capita. And that's a good indicator of a country's material development. And there's sort of a lot of critique launched at that, but still a lot of economists believe in the force of that.
Didn't the Chinese government believe in that, though?
Because
there's lots of these degrowth economists who sort of say, oh, GDP doesn't really matter. But I mean, the big thing that, Deng and the Chinese Communist Party did, to my mind, is say, look, let's put ideology to some degree to one side. Deng's, famous phrase, it doesn't matter if the cat is black or white as long as it catches mice. Let's put ideology to one side and do whatever it takes to get 10% growth a year, and that will lift our people out of poverty. And kind of, they did it and it happened. Yeah. So does China not show that actually GDP as a concept isn't necessarily this neoliberal thing, and that any developmental state, if you focus on that metric, that probably actually will be quite good for your people.
Yeah, I absolutely agree here. And I don't even think it's only a sort of a neoliberal thing. Even many heterodox economists use GDP as a good indicator of economic development. And I think for a country to measure its progress of sort of growth in material things, for example, in output, on its own, it's a good indicator. But where I think China is sort of debunking a bit the usefulness of GDP is if we look at its per capita level compared to, say, today's wealthy countries. So let's take the United States. China's GDP per capita is about 1/6 of that of the United States, 1/3 if we adjust for purchasing power. But China is really at the frontier of technological development. It has the best infrastructure systems in the world, I would argue, if you take both quality and scale into account. It produces practically everything across the value chain. And this is sort of not something that, when I traveled around and I sort of saw countries and I thought, oh, this is the GDP per capita of this country. Oh, that makes sense in terms of the levels of development that I'm seeing. When I go to China, it just doesn't make sense that it's quote unquote a developing country anymore, that it has so much lower GDP per capita than the wealthiest countries in the world.
Is that because, and I ask this as a genuine question. We're going to talk about our trips. I just come back from China. You just come back from China. But in terms of this question of GDP per capita and how rich it seems when you're there, is that just about the countries versus the cities? Because is it the case that if you were to look at Shanghai or Beijing or Chengdu, for example, the GDP per capita would be at something which is much closer to European or North American levels, but what's bringing it down is that there is still a large rural population that has a completely different standard of living to, your median American?
I'm really happy you're bringing this up. My short answer is no. We have, in the US, you also have huge regional disparities. You have, California, Silicon Valley, San Francisco, really high income, Mississippi, really low income. And yeah, maybe you could argue that the lowest income areas in China are still somewhat lower income than the United States, but you still have near universal access to electricity, near universal access to roads and good transport infrastructure, near universal access to housing, in China, that is. Most people have access to good private transport. If they can't afford a really expensive car or even a cheap car, they can afford a cheap electric scooter. So I would say even at the sort of poorest quintile or segment of the population, you have a relatively good living standard. What's interesting is when I was in China, I talked to a lot of people. A lot of people had lived in both America and in China for a long time. I met one person who said he'd grown up in America very poor, and he's now lived in China for 12 years. And he said he'd rather grow up really poor in China. That was just one statement. And there were other people who said, okay, maybe at this stage of development, America is better than China. But generally, the fact that all these people who had grown up in wealthy countries said were sort of ambiguous in their answers as to whether or not the living standard across the spectrum in China and across regions in China, they were ambiguous as to whether or not it was better, is actually a really sort of just interesting observation.
And is that partly because, so I suppose one thing I noticed in China, obviously everyone, this is not a surprise to anyone, this is not breaking news, China's infrastructure is good, but China's infrastructure is very good, right? The metro is, very expansive and cheap. The high-speed rail obviously is amazing and affordable. Not actually as cheap as I thought, but very much affordable. You wouldn't sort of commute on it on a daily basis, but that's like commuting from sort of London to Berlin anyway, if you're going from Beijing to Chengdu or whatever. So it's cheap for what it is. And then in cities, housing is abundant, so it's relatively cheap, and public transport is quite abundant and cheap. So I could see how you could get by on a low income. But getting taxis, it was really cheap. And that to me is almost like a bad sign, because it's showing you that there are a lot of people working for Didi, which is their version of Uber, and it's £2 for quite a long ride. So you sort of, there are, even in those urban centres, some very low wage workers.
Yeah, for sure. That's maybe an area where I think, it's, say you take the median worker, the median employee in China versus that in a wealthy country in the West. You could probably make a strong case that it's, workers are more precarious in China, not only in terms of sort of their what they can consume. Obviously, there's a difference here in terms of, okay, in China, you don't actually need to consume or spend that much, but still, even that considering real wages at the median level are low, there's a huge share of the workforce that, as you pointed out, work in the gig economy, don't have as strong contractual arrangements as, for example, we have in big cities here in the UK or in the US. And this idea of this I don't know if you heard of this 996 culture, that in white-collar jobs in China, that there's this pressure to work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week, for example, in the tech industry, that defies national labor laws, but it's not actually, these laws are not strictly enforced. So, yeah, labor precarity, competition in the labor force is actually really high in China. And that is maybe an area where we can say that things are not all that great in China. There is one thing I want to mention when it comes to the state of labor power, labor standards in China, which has a global dynamic, which I think is really important. So I'm from Norway, and in Norway, unions and capital unions and the owners of capital, the private sector, they've more or less been on a honeymoon for decades. Really strong union, high unionization rates, really strong labor standards. I believe part of the reason here is that in Norway, we don't have any jobs exposed to international competition. More or less, very few jobs are exposed to international competition. Part of that is because we're an oil economy, but also part of that is because all the cheap and precarious jobs can be outsourced to lower income countries, China being one of them. So China also has had to come from a position of being subordinate in the global economy, still to some degree subordinate in the global economy. It's still Chinese workers working in supply chains for Apple rather than the other way around. So we also have to take that into consideration when we talk about precarious labor in China, and the fact that given this position, that labor standards have actually improved tremendously in China over a 30-year period. So it's a really complex picture, I think, with respect to labor standards in China.
Is that the case? Yeah, because I haven't heard so much about that, because obviously what everyone knows about China is that there's no independent trade unions. There's a reasonable degree of labor repression, and in firms, sort of the firm is functioning, sort of its ownership structure is sometimes quite ambiguous. Is it state-owned? Is it privately owned? Is it some mishmash of the two? Is it privately owned but informally sort of directed by the state? All of that in terms of the ownership is very different in China than it is in the West. In terms of the relationship with the boss to the worker, it's quite similar, right? It's very hierarchical, quite authoritarian. And is that, but you're saying despite that, labor standards have increased. I suppose, could you sort of expand on that?
One stat that I think supports this idea that labor standards have increased is simply how much wages have increased. Yeah. So, for example, real wages that account for or adjust for inflation, have, I think, increased something like 25-fold, if I'm not mistaken, since around 1980, which is huge. So I believe that's the median wage in urban China, and a lot more people in China live in urban areas. So that's a tremendous improvement in labor standards themselves. And you have clear evidence of more people working on.
欢迎回来。刚才的对话没有停留在情绪化的站队上，而是从发展经济的几层逻辑出发，拆解了中国现代化进程中常被外界忽视的结构性特征。我们可以将访谈的核心思考推导至更深维度的博弈分析。首先，关于中国崛起证明了意识形态的争论本身就是一个伪命题。新自由主义倾向于将其归功于纯粹的市场化，左翼则强调国家权力介入。但尤斯汀研究表明，中国的成功恰恰在于超越了简单的意识形态的教条。 无论是结果导向的务实路线，还是国家在关键基础设施与产业政策上的长线战略，中国展现的是一种将强有力的国家治理与高度竞争的国内市场完美结合的复合型模式。更进一步来看， GDP 人均数值与实际物质生活水平的错位反差，揭示了全球分工体系的几层密码。在过去几十年里，西方发达国家维持高标准的劳工权益，很大程度上依赖于将大量高风险低附加值的供应链外包给发展中国家。而中国作为曾经的全球供应链承载者，不仅在内部完成了从低端代工到全产业链的自主跃升，更通过工程师红利反向重塑了全球技术的边界。当然，这种发展并非没有代价。在劳动密集型转向技术密集型的阵痛期中，中国社会同样承受着高强度竞争与劳动者权益需要持续完善的现实压力。我们将视线拉高至历史的长河，中国的崛起不仅仅是一场经济数量奇迹，更是一次对传统全球治理观的深度重构。它证明了现代化并非是只有西方一条单行道。在面对这样一个不断重塑全球规则的庞大经济体时，西方理论体系的急起失语，是否意味着我们需要建立一套全新的宏观经济观察框架？欢迎在评论区留下你的理性思考，关注胤蓝智库，我们下期见。